Between July 25th and July 29th, up to 16 inches of rain fell in parts of eastern Kentucky, leading to historic flash flooding and river flooding. The National Weather Service set 2 records for 24-hour rainfall. The rainfall amounts are historically unheard of, and there is less than a 1 in 1,000 chance of that amount of rain falling in any given year during a 4-day period. The flooding led to more deaths than the March 2nd, 2012 tornado outbreak, and many are calling it the worst natural disaster in eastern Kentucky, at least in their lifetime. We'll recap the flood of 2022 with meteorologist Dustin Jordan, who works for the National Weather Service office in Jackson, and WYMT morning forecaster Brandon Robinson, who was on the air for hours on July 29th, warning folks about the flash flood emergency. That's tonight on Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
From WYMT Mountain News, this is Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
It's Keno night, and you got this. And you've got 37 ways to win a top prize.
Historic flooding has devastated families across eastern Kentucky. Thank you to the thousands of Kentucky businesses and people stepping in to help their neighbors. If you too would like to help with local relief efforts, visit WYMT.com now. Together, Appalachia rises.
My guest tonight, Dustin Jordan with the National Weather Service office in Jackson. And you all know Brandon Robinson, morning forecaster here at WYMT, and does a whole lot of other things too, and has not slept much like me in the last week or so. Yep. It's been quite a month, the month of July, now in August, and hopefully things are calming down. But Dustin, here is the question: is this the worst natural disaster in eastern Kentucky?
That's a great question, Steve, and I wish I had the answer for that, but I know there have been other floods in history, and I know 1939 Frozen Creek was 79 people, so it'll be interesting to see just how this ranks up there, but it's definitely going to be pretty high. Yeah,
and I think the flash flooding destruction is particularly bad in some of these counties like we've had a lot of destructive flash floods, but most of them have been centered in just one county. This one affected a big chunk of real estate, right?
Yeah, this was a much larger area and a lot of rainfall. Plus, you got to remember we got rainfall even heading into this too, and so that makes a big difference as well.
You've been here in eastern Kentucky a few years. Did you even think it was possible for us to see a flooding event like this?
Not quite like this. I never dreamed that I would see something like this. You certainly don't want to see something like this. This is really worst case scenario, with this kind of flooding. I mean, this kind of rainfall. I mean, rainfall of 14 to 16 inches potentially in some places is just incredible.
Yeah, Brandon, you were on the air, I don't know how many hours, pretty much all the early morning hours on, I believe, July 29th. Tell me what that was like as these reports were coming in from the National Weather Service and you were having to relay them to everybody in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and we had talked about, well, should I go on? I just come off of Facebook, and I was like, I'm going to go on. I'm going to go on for a little bit and just kind of see what's happening here. We were starting to get more reports, and I remember I had my phone in my hand because I was trying to, on our system, it would only show 4 warnings at a time. So I had other ones I was scrolling through my Twitter feed and all that, and my phone started vibrating in my hand. And I was like, what is this? And I looked down. It was a WIA alert for a flash flood emergency. And I've never gotten one of those before for flash flood. I've seen them for other things, but that was the first one I'd seen. And I had to look at it for a second. I was like, am I reading this right? And then we had the Weather Service chat on one of our big monitors over in the Weather Center. And I walked over there and I was like, yeah, that's a flash flood emergency. And then that was just the first of 2 that were issued, and then they kept getting extended.
Were you already on the air at that point?
Yes.
I thought so, because we were texting back and forth.
Yeah.
I had gone home, and hindsight's 2020, I wish I had stayed here, because after it started getting really bad, I wasn't sure I could even get back up here. But we were texting. There was a small break in the rain.
Right.
and I said, okay, I'm going to go home. We knew more was coming, but we had no idea what was going to happen. But I remember texting you. I was seeing what it was doing at my house. I said, I've never seen water come off the hill behind my house like it's doing right now. I think you need to go on the air.
Yeah.
You were already on Facebook.
Right.
But I said, I think you need to go on the air, and it probably wasn't, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes later, and the first flash flood emergency was issued.
Yeah, and then, you know, Cameron was getting ready. He actually texted me, because he was coming into the morning for me. He texted me, he said, whoa, flash flood emergency? Because he's from Alabama. It's always tornadoes down there. He's never seen flooding like this. So he got here about 20 minutes after that. But, you know, we knew it was going to be bad. Once the flash flood emergency was issued, we didn't know how bad. And when they issued the second one, and then more reports started coming in, we were trying to get everything cleared as fast as we could and get them up at least on the air through Facebook or whatever. But I tell you, when it really hit me, and I know this is going to sound kind of awful, but I think when you have a personal connection to it, it makes it that much more real. My wife was texting me pictures from our house, and we were very fortunate that we didn't have water in the house, but she sent me a picture. It was basically at the bottom of our steps, and I had never seen the creek that high at our house.
And you live in Letcher County.
Live in Letcher County, and it was something. And the power went out. Had no communication for hours. That was about 2 o'clock, and then about 6:45, we were actually in the morning news. We modified our format that day for weather coverage and live reports. But she finally got a phone call out and said, we're okay, didn't get in the house, we're all right. But I tell you what else that kind of made it interesting for me to kind of give me the scope of what was going on. Our back parking lot flooded. I'd never seen that before. And that basically, combined with the amount of rain, our drainage gates got stopped up, and it had flooded the parking lot, and it was getting, you know, we talk about all the time, with turn around, don't drown. If it's halfway up on your tires, especially if it's fast moving water, you're going to get swept away most of the time. Thankfully, the water wasn't fast moving, it was ponding, but it was halfway up on the tires. And it was like, I tell people this all the time, if this is happening, to turn around. And that stuck out of my mind. And we actually opened the back door and pointed a camera outside, and I was kind of like, here it is. If this doesn't make it any more real for you, I don't know what will. Because they say people are like visual learners. And this is it, right here it is.
Well, and I don't think, you know, the station's been here since 1985. I'm pretty confident in saying that that's never happened here. It looked like a lake.
Yep.
And literally, the camera we're looking at right now, I believe, was pointed out the back door of this studio that we're in, watching our parking lot flood. Fortunately, we didn't get, I don't think, much or any water in the building.
No.
But we ended up having to move all our vehicles. If you're in Hazard, you might have seen all our vehicles parked out front because our back parking lot was a lake.
Yep.
And then it was a mud pit.
Yep. But I tell you, we had to move our personal cars too that night when it was going on. Our morning producer, Kirsten Baum, had went out there, moved hers, and I saw it was right at the edge of mine. I was like, while you're out there, can you go move mine too? Because she's already got leather soaking wet, you know, and we were still on the air. And when she came back, she's right around 5'5", I think. It's up to her knees. I mean, that's how deep it was in our parking lots. Yeah. I mean, it was just crazy.
Dustin, tell me about the records set by this rainfall at the Weather Service.
Yeah, so we had several daily records obviously set, even at Jackson, Kentucky, our office there on the hill and at the airport. Also, I'm sure multiple records set even outside of that. And then, of course, just the rivers themselves setting, you know, all-time records as well at Whitesburg and Jackson as well.
The record at Whitesburg for the North Fork of the Kentucky River is astonishing.
Yeah.
It shattered the 1957 record. And do you even know exactly how high it was? I think the rain gauge broke.
Yeah, so I think well, especially the gauge there that measures the river levels, I know it did break at one time, but they were pretty confident that that was pretty close to the number. So yeah, it was completely shattered, like you said. And you know, I was looking back too, and that's a pretty quick rising river. there anyway. A lot of these are headwater points. You got to remember that they're pretty small for you know, a river, and so they rise very quick. And you saw it fall very quick too. So that's how it works on some of these points, and very difficult to forecast those when they happen. It's pretty much like flash flooding a river.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly the way it is in Hazard, it goes down about as fast as it comes up. You know, one thing I've wondered, because there were record crests on the North Fork in Whitesburg to the south of Hazard and Jackson to the north of Hazard, but there was not a record crest here in Hazard. It was pretty much, you know, about the same level as we've seen the last few years with floods. So you have to wonder if the Carr Creek and Buckhorn dams may have saved us from a catastrophe in downtown Hazard.
It's certainly possible. You know, I would want to you know, see if the Corps had any idea if that was really what happened from their mitigation standpoint. And you know, that's not really my expertise per se in my office, but certainly something that would be possible and not out of the realm of possibilities.
And Brandon, of course, you live in Letcher County. You know, I've heard countless times the water just got in areas it's never been before. And tell me about what you saw. I know you've been in Whitesburg after the destruction, and just your thoughts.
It's almost like, and you know, a lot of people say this after a natural disaster, it looked like a war zone, and it really did. I finally made it home. I stayed in Hazard on Thursday night, and then I finally got home. It was about 3:45 Saturday morning, and when you're driving in the dark, you seem like Chandler had video of Isom with all that flooding down there. But you're driving in the dark, and you're not seeing anything. And the power was on at Isom. Everything looked normal. I mean, you could tell spots where it had been up over the road, and I even looked over there where the IGA is, and I was like, okay, the power's on over there. It looks kind of normal. And then I turned on 7 at Breedings to go up toward my house, and it looked fine there for just a minute. And then all of a sudden you get past, if people know where Southern Steel is out there on 7, you get past that and you turn a little corner toward Collins Body Shop. There was a building against the bridge in the river. Part of the bridge had trees on it that was down to 1 lane. And it was just a different world. It was pitch dark. You couldn't see anything. Power was out for 2 or 3 days before it come back on, and then it went out again. But the further up I drove, the more that you could see, and this is just that night, and then I went into Whitesburg the next day, but you could just see the amount of damage. And when I got home, my wife had told me, because she hadn't come back and forth out to get service to call and communicate and all that, she said, park over across the bridge when you get home and walk in. I just happened to have a flashlight in my emergency kit in my car. I got it out and I walked in, and the water was still rushing over the road where I live, Sugar Run Road, and I had to jump the creek to get to my house. I mean, I was still in a full suit, dress shoes and everything. I mean, I didn't have a jacket, but shirt, tie, dress pants, and dress shoes. Had to jump the creek to get into my yard because I couldn't get through into my driveway. So, I mean, it was wild, and I actually shot a video and posted on Facebook of a walk and talk the next day, and as bad as it looked at night, it was worse in the daylight. And then the closer I got to Whitesburg, you could see the water line on houses at Sand Lick where it had been basically up past their living room windows. I mean, it was catastrophic. I have not made it out to the other end of the county like Neon and Jenkins yet. Hope to do that in a few days, but I mean, it's just indescribable. Yeah. Indescribable.
And you hit on something. You can't tell at night how bad it is, and that's part of the danger.
Yes.
And this hit in the middle of the night, and you have to believe that may have contributed to a lot of the fatalities, unfortunately. Talk about how dangerous a flash flood can be at night.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Brandon said, you're disoriented a little bit, right? You can't see things. If power's going out,
right,
you don't have any lights, and so that makes a huge difference. And people's response is just different, right? They may be asleep, they may not be as aware of the weather and what's going on, and so that makes a huge difference. And I would say it definitely could have attributed to a lot of the issues we had.
Yeah, and we haven't heard all the circumstances, but there's certainly a lot of heroic stories coming out of this, and a lot of people just said, I don't care, I'm saving my neighbor, I'm getting in this water and I'm doing it, I don't care.
Right.
And I think we had a lot of angels watching over a lot of folks too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm surprised, and I know this is terrible to say, I'm surprised the death toll's not higher since it hit in the middle of the night. And I actually had a friend of mine who texted me the other day once he kind of got everything back and said that he got the WIA alert with no power, no cell phone service, no internet. So that's how crucial those alerts are, because you don't have to have anything to get them.
Well, I don't know how people slept.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think I got at least 3 of those.
Yeah.
Of course, I was awake anyway, watching you
right
at home, and honestly, I wanted to come back here, but I wasn't sure I could get back here. It was too dangerous.
Right.
There was mudslides everywhere and debris everywhere. It was just very dangerous that night. We were just here, Brandon and I were just here earlier this year talking about the 10th anniversary of the March 2nd, 2012 tornado outbreak, and how it was still the worst natural disaster that you've ever been on the air for. That's now changed, I guess, in some ways.
In some ways, yeah.
And has it sunk in yet for you, the scope of this disaster?
I think it's starting to. You know, we're basically past 2 weeks at this point, but I think it's, oh yeah, exactly. See, time is distorted right now, but again, it's just the simple fact that, you know, it started to sink in more. I really didn't get the chance to sit down and look at some of the destruction until sometime on Friday, actually. Might have been even Friday evening, or no, Thursday evening, I'm sorry. And then when I kind of sat down and looked at it Friday morning, it hit the scope of just how bad it was, how bad the destruction was. And I don't know, all I could do was cry. I mean, that's because it's one thing seeing it on TV in other places, but it's where you live. You know, it's literally where I live. And, you know, and this is just pictures. When I actually got home, it was just, I don't know, it's hard to find the words to mention how bad it is. It really is.
And I know you do, and I'm sure you do too, take this personally. Oh, yeah. You know, when you lose lives, it's tough.
Yeah.
Talk about what goes into issuing a flash flood emergency and the criteria, and I'm sure that's nothing you take lightly.
No, I mean, these are exceedingly rare. I mean, like you said, you were getting texts like, wow, you know, this is the real deal, right? And so, yeah, absolutely. We're looking for confirmation a lot of times on, you know, swift water rescues, those kinds of things going on before we issue those. But, you know, as Brandon knows, we didn't have a lot of information coming in that night. So we were doing it a lot based off of meteorology and just knowing that these kinds of rainfall totals are going to cause serious issues. So we were upgrading those with not a lot of information. I mean, to be honest with you, and and our guys did that very fast, as they could. And so it goes from a base flash flood warning up to a considerable and then catastrophic, which is your flash flood emergency, just for some background on that. And they upgraded to considerable and then right into flash flood emergencies. And I believe we issued 3 flash flood emergencies that night.
They started a little after, I believe it was 1 o'clock. And then they finally ended, was it 9:30 that next morning?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe that's
so, I mean, right. The Weather Service just kept extending the current ones because we didn't know, we knew that it was still pouring the rain. We had rainfall rates 1.5 inches, 2 inches per hour. And it just kept sitting, just kept pouring. And I really appreciate what you guys did, because like you said, we had no reports. You all were just watching radar and basing it off of pure data, and in this case it worked out. But I mean, it actually, I'd say it even more than worked out for the most part, but it's just a simple fact that when you lose communication, you can't get reports out. And we always tell people, if you can do it safely, send them in. People couldn't do it because they didn't have communication. And we learned, it was probably well into the next day, that like you said, neighbors were saving their neighbors. Didn't know any of that night. Didn't know the scope. You know, when we lost power, we didn't have a view of downtown Whitesburg like we normally have. And then, you know, it's just the places that we have cameras that we could see what was going on, they were out. So we didn't have any, you know, confirmation.
We're still now working on the communications, cell phone service, still lots of issues. But when you issue those flash flood emergencies, you were using language like catastrophic, life-threatening, and that ended up being correct.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. You know, some people always want to blame something. It does seem like we are having more natural disasters in Kentucky and around the world. Is that a fair statement?
I mean, certainly, you know, if you look at our records, even the new 30-year normals, you know, the actual precipitation amounts were increased for Jackson and London, you know, so we are certainly seeing more rainfall, and that, you know, and that seems to be from the normals.
So I know it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but should people expect more disasters like this?
That's a great question, and I don't have the answer for that. I mean, I do think that, you know, as it always goes back to, you should always be prepared, right? And, you know, we had watches out ahead of time, you know, as Brandon knows, and so just preparing now, you know, for you know, the worst case scenario is best.
Right. And I'll add to that real fast, Steve. We had been, and I'm going to call out some folks here briefly. Some of the national media has said it came without warning. No, it didn't. We were warning people for days. Now, we didn't know how bad it was going to be, but we were warning people for days. There's a flood watch out. There's a possibility that there could be, you got to keep an eye on your creeks and streams, especially if you live in a flood-prone area. Water could rise quickly. You need to get to high ground if you see that going on. But in this situation, and anybody who says that they knew this was coming is lying. There's no way, nobody, weather service, nobody knew this was coming. But it's the simple fact that we did try, but we didn't know what was coming.
Like nobody can expect something like this. But you go back to the old Boy Scout motto, be prepared.
Right, exactly. And that's, you know, keep an emergency kit in your vehicle. You never know if you're going to get stranded somewhere. And like, just like I found out, keep a flashlight in your car because you never know when you're going to need it. So,
do you believe climate change is involved here?
That's a great question, and you know, when you're trying to relate it to climate change, I'm just not sure. You know, I know that, you know, certainly, like we said, the rainfall amounts certainly have risen, you know, in terms of what your normals are and those kinds of things. But to attribute it to climate change, I'm just not sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have probably forgotten now, we were pretty dry just a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Weren't we even abnormally dry?
Abnormally dry, yep.
So that just shows how quickly things can change, and now what were we for the month of July above normal? Several inches.
Oh, yeah. At Jackson, we were almost 15 inches when it should have been 5.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so I mean, that much above. And just weeks ago, like you said, we were abnormally dry. And at my home sensor, I actually took a picture of this the other day because I got to get back to it. And it kept, even though it's battery powered and whatever, and solar powered outside, at my house in the past week, or like the week between, you know, when it started and when it ended, 9.1 inches in a week in Letcher County. So, I mean, it's just a simple fact that, you know, to go from dry to that in such a short amount of time, astonishing.
Yeah. Obviously, this disaster is going to take months, if not years, to recover from. you know, I think a lot of people, like right after the March 2nd tornado outbreak, they're going to be a little on edge when it rains.
Yep.
Are there any trends that you are seeing looking ahead to the future? And I know you can't predict the future, but
We try, though.
Are there any trends you are seeing to suggest that we could have more issues down the road with flooding?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's not going to take much rainfall. I mean, the soil moistures are way above normal, you know, for this time of year. And any amount of rainfall, and especially if we get some, you know, some thunderstorms, I would hate to guess that we were going to get something this widespread. I mean, I just don't think, like you said, I mean, predicting that would just be, you know, would be astonishing, you know.
Yeah. And something else I'll add to what he was talking about, it doesn't take much when the ground is that saturated. We had that event happen on a Wednesday night going into Thursday. The following Monday, we got just a little bit more rain, and the same places flooded again. Neon had more flooding. Parts of Knott County had more flooding again, and it wasn't anything even close to that. It might have been an inch or inch and a half of rain, and that's how, when the ground is that saturated, it doesn't take much.
And it put Whitesburg in action.
Exactly. So.
And I even noticed today the river here is still running a little high, so it's not going to take as much as usual to cause more problems in the next few weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd say.
As historic as this flooding was, Brandon, I think I've heard many people say this, the response has been historic as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious your thoughts, just as not being from Eastern Kentucky, although you've lived here a few years, your thoughts of what the response of Eastern Kentuckians has been to start recovering from this flood.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, you know, I've been working a little bit even with the FEMA EOC here in Hazard, and there's teams from all over the country helping out. There's teams from from other entities too, you know, from religious organizations. I mean, Red Cross, you name it, are here in Eastern Kentucky trying to help out. I know my church back home, I'm from Eastern Tennessee, and they're coming up here to bring food and supplies and what have you, and work up here. So it's incredible to see that kind of response. It really it warms your heart.
And you always see that, Brandon, here, but this has taken it, I think, to another level.
Yeah, I've had people messaging me from other states asking what they can do to help. And, you know, I've been trying to tell them, you know, what I know, but the response has been overwhelming. And I think the governor has said it best in his last few news conferences: we're going to keep sending water until they tell us to stop. Basically, that they've got so much water they don't need it anymore. So again, I think everybody is working so well together on this one, and I think it's a level of cooperation and support. But here is the thing I will say: Eastern Kentuckians always show up. They show up if it's in Eastern Kentucky, they show up if it's in Western Kentucky, other states, it doesn't matter. I mean, Eastern Kentuckians are the best people you will find because they know how to handle hard situations. You know, a lot of people grew up in hard situations and they know how to handle it. So I mean, it's the simple fact that when Mother Nature's at its worst, I guess you could say we're at our best because we know what to do.
Yeah. You know, and I have heard people, local people, even though we're strong, you know, I think it is hard for some people to see how we recover from this, but we will.
Oh yeah.
It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time. But you're already seeing, just a week out, you're seeing so many signs of people helping their neighbors.
Oh yeah. I mean, and we heard
starting to rebuild.
We heard stories in the immediate aftermath of people who had just gotten pulled out of their flooded houses and then went right back into the water to rescue their neighbors.
Absolutely.
You know, and then people coming into shelters with nothing, and then, you know, helping people there too. So,
well, Dustin, we're about out of time. Appreciate you joining us. Brandon, let's hope and pray that we don't have anything even close to this ever again, really.
Yeah.
But as we've mentioned, we've got to be prepared.
Exactly. That's the best advice any of us could give you, is to pay attention, just be prepared, keep something in your car just to make sure that, just be ready for anything.
Have more than one way to get a warning.
Yes, that's very important.
Weather radio or
Yep.
The WYMT weather app.
That's right.
Very handy tool.
But I will say this real quick: if you don't have service, the weather app doesn't work. So you've got to make sure you have a way to get a warning.
You need to have a backup plan.
That's right.
All right. Dustin, Brandon, appreciate you and all you do. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Issues and Answers.